Okay, so our whole thing we're trying to do today is to be able to do an ETL process that takes us from a transactional system to a data warehouse. So then here's the operational system. It's actually food establishment inspections in the city of Chicago. You should be able to access this from my educator. Oh, it's asking for my net ID. That's what's going on here. Just agreed to something. I'm not sure what I agreed to, but my educator. Uh, 617P is our class. So you should be able to come to the Advanced Query Editor and have direct access to this data. You'll need to be on the SQL Server at my educator, and you'll want to use the food inspection credentials. And then select star from, what's one of the ones we had violation? And so if we look at the schema, there's an inspection that happens. An inspection may have an arbitrary number of violations. Each violation is for a single point. So there's a list of things that you have to check to be sure, that you're not going to kill people at this restaurant. Those are all inside this list of points. So if we select star from point, these are the 45 things that they're looking for when they come in to inspect your restaurant. Number 1, source sound condition, no spoilage. Oh, this is in the food category protection. No spoilage, foods properly labeled, shellfish tags in place. I have no idea what a shellfish tag is, but I guess if you're selling shellfish, it's got to be tagged in some way that you know where it came from. You can't just go fish it out of the river and sell it to somebody. So when an inspector goes into a restaurant, he's got a clipboard, probably a digital clipboard these days, and he's checking each one of these 45 things. Now, if the person, if he finds a violation and he records that violation, puts a comment on that, and there's a fine associated with each violation. An employee is doing the inspection, and an establishment is what is being inspected. So this is, data that the city of Chicago just makes public. Kind of thing that you probably don't want to read if you eat in Chicago because it's kind of scary, the things you see in here, but that's the way it goes. Questions? Right, so let's look at this and then just say, if we're trying to take this into something that's a little more queryable, a little more designed for analytics, what do you think? What do you think would be a good fact? What do you think would be good dimensions? Jordan?
Maybe the inspection itself would be a good fact.
Okay, so one possibility for a fact is the inspection. I mean, this is an activity that's happening, and so there's the inspection. So let's think about, if we make that the fact, what do we have to do with which is at a lower level, inspection or violation? Violation's at a lower level. So if I make inspection the fact, which I could do, in fact I may want to do that, what do I have to, because each inspection can have many violations. What do I have to do with the violation information? If my fact table is going to be an inspection, the grain is going to be an inspection, the detail for an inspection, and that inspection's got 7 violations, what am I going to have to do with the violations? Somehow I've got to summarize them so I can essentially have one location for the violations for that. So it may very well be that we want an inspection fact table. That's not the direction we're headed today. We're going to go the next level lower, and so we're going to use violations as the fact table. And so the grain for that is going to be, each violation. So there might be a dozen or more violations on a particular inspection, and so inspection then will end up being a dimension of our violation, of our fact table. What other dimensions do you think we're going to want to have? What other dimension tables will we want to have? We think about, we've got a record of a violation. We're going to be able to link one step from that and be able to say, what do we want to group these violations by?
By inspection.
So yeah, we want to know by inspection. I want to see, hey, here's a set of violations. I want to group them by inspection. What else? So we'll have an inspection dimension. The establishment, that'll be a dimension. The employee, the inspector, yeah, the employee, that'll be a dimension. So the point is actually the rule that was violated. So you've got to have shellfish tags in place. You had shrimp in here, it's not tagged, we don't know where it came from, you're going to kill somebody. That's, yeah, so that would probably be a dimension there as well. And then one more that I haven't heard yet. Yeah, the date's going to be a dimension as well. All right, so that's where we're headed. So let's go ahead and open Visual Studio. A year ago, I installed Visual Studio, maybe for the first time in my life. Yeah. So far that it took so long that I had to install it. Anyway, at the time, I think I got some trial version or something. So I uninstalled it and installed the real one that I got from DreamSpark, and it still wouldn't, it said, this is this trial version. I did that twice before I realized there was a place to put the key in. And it takes a long time to install. Okay. So we are going to create a new integration services project. So File, New, Project. And then there are lots that we can choose from. I'm looking for the one in the business intelligence group under Integration Services. So SQL Server Integration Services is what I'm after, and it will be an Integration Services project. So those of you who are trying to follow along, is this showing up for you? How many of you are saying, yeah, got it? Okay, that's good. How many of you are going, I'm trying to follow along, and I'm not seeing it? So yeah, if you didn't, did you follow that guide that I posted? Okay, you might just be watching. All right, Integration Services Project. Here's a great name, Integration Services Project 10. I'm going to call it Integration Services Project ETL. And we'll say OK. Just create a project. And then here we go. OK, so here's my package. Here's where I'm going to be doing the work. So I'm going to start off by creating a package that will establish my data warehouse. So if I come back to the Excel file and go to the next tab, this is what we're going to try to create. So a process that says we're going to create a database that's going to be our data warehouse database. And we're going to create our violation fact table. We'll create 3-dimension tables. We won't get them all today. And then in this one, we'll also create another database that we'll use for staging data. And here we'll actually populate the date dimension as well. So the population of that date dimension doesn't come from our transactional data. And so we're just going to generate that when we create the database. So what we're seeing here is that all of these tasks are just SQL scripts. And that's what that symbol is. So let's go ahead and bring one in that we'll call create DW inspection database. In fact, the label for that is in column A, and then the SQL for it is in column B. So I'm going to choose right here this execute SQL task, and I'll just drag it in to my canvas. I'll name that just from the name that we have in column 1. All right, so now we're going to need to configure this. So I'll double click it. And the first thing it's going to need to know is it's going to need to know the connection. We're going to execute some structured query language. It needs to know what server it's going to execute this against. And so here we're going to need to create a connection. And so actually all of our connections are listed right here. There are no connections yet. And so we're going to create a connection here. We'll just drop down the list, new connection. Let me create it right from here. Oh, I already have some. All right, I think you're looking something like this. No connections, is that right? All right, so we'll click on the new button, create a new connection. Now, there are several providers that we can choose from. We want to use, what we're going to do is we're going to build the data warehouse on the local machine using the SQL Server that you installed. So I'm going to use the SQL Server native client. And then it needs to know a server name. So if it's a remote server, we would just put in the host name here, but it's our local one, so we'll just use localhost. And for this one, I think Windows authentication will be best. And enter or select a database name. Let's go ahead and just connect onto the master database for this one. And that should give us then a connection, localhost master, very good. And we should then be able to use that. So we've now created and we're using this localhost master. We'll see that that connection now shows up over here in our list of connections. Anyone working on this that's not getting it to this point? Scott, over here. So should we go back through that part? So I'm going to create a new connection. I'll need to click new again here to actually create that connection. I'm going to choose the native client here. That's probably the default for you. And then you're going to choose localhost. This will get you connected to your local instance of SQL Server. Windows authentication. And then here you'll put in master for the database name. You'll probably go even without binding onto a particular database for this one, but let's go ahead and create that as the master. Ready? Okay, so now we need to get, so now it knows where to execute, where to send the statement that we're going to put in here to be executed. Now we're going to give it an actual statement to execute. And so we'll find this on the build DW tab in the Excel file in column B. I'll click on the builder, and then we'll paste this statement in. I know that's tiny there, but it just says if the database doesn't exist, create a database. We're looking for a database named DW inspection. If it already exists, great. If it doesn't, then we're going to create it. And again, that whole statement, don't type that, for heaven's sakes, copy it out of the Excel file. It's in B2 is the statement for that one. To get this window up, we come down to where it says SQL statement here, and then we click on the little builder button, the little ellipses here to the right. Incidentally, you don't have to open this. You can paste it directly onto that line. It works. It may not work if there's an enter in the statement. You better open the builder to do it. All right, I am now going to open the SQL Server Management Studio. And we'll connect onto my local host. Look at databases, and so here's that DW inspection. I have it here because I was playing with it. I'm going to delete it. I'm hoping to delete it. Okay, so I just deleted that. So if we look here and refresh, that is no longer a database that I have here in my SQL Server. And that's this here. So sorry, this is SQL Server Management Studio. Help make SQL Server better. So that would have installed with SQL Server. So it's just called SQL Server Management Studio. And that's just the direct, that's just the direct front end for SQL Server. It's Microsoft's workbench for working with SQL Server. Is there anyone who doesn't have it installed? It should install.
I can install.
Didn't install?
I think it didn't come with what I can install.
It turns out you don't really need it. You can do the rest of this without that. That's just so we can kind of see what's going on. So don't try to install it if it's not already installed. So yeah, you got to tell it when you open. You got to tell it which one to connect to. Let me close, and we'll go through that again. So it's going to come up, and it'll be tiny on this screen for some reason. Here we go. So here, this is what you're getting, which server to connect to. So you're going to connect just to localhost. Windows authentication, you should be okay. Localhost master 1, delete. Okay, so now I've got the first step here. The whole idea is that we're going to be building a script. It's a set of statements that will execute when we run this particular process. But we can kind of test it as we're going along. And so just to make sure everything's working okay, I'm going to right-click this, and I am going to choose execute task. And that will then try to execute that script. Package violation error. I didn't expect an error. Violations, error at create connection manager. Connection manager doesn't exist. Okay, I might have changed the connection manager. Let's take another look at this. I'll reconfigure. Connection. I think when I made that other connection, I bound onto that second connection, which I deleted. So I've got localhost master. If I edit this task, I've got that signed up as the connection. I've got my SQL statement in here. I should be able to execute this. That looks better. Okay, so it goes through, it executes it, and it's actually taken me into this debug mode. And the first time you're in this, it's not especially clear that you've gone to some different kind of mode here. You've got to click this stop button to get out of this. So you've got these diagonal lines, which is supposed to be some kind of a clue, but not really helpful. So we'll hit stop, and that will take me back. And now, if you got a green check mark there, it created that database. But I'm going to come over here to SQL Server Management Studio and refresh and look at my databases. I should now see that DW inspection database here. So that's just validation that it really went to where I was trying to make it go. Okay. So now we're going to build out the rest of that script. So the next task that we're going to do is we're going to create the fact table on violation. So I'll bring in another execute SQL task. And I'm going to want another connection manager for this one. Okay, so my create database, I now have, when I create a connection, I got to tell it the server I'm connecting to as well as a database I'm connecting to. In this last step, I'm creating the database that I'm going to need for my data warehouse. And so I connected onto the master database with that connection. But now that database is created, I'm going to want to create another connection that connects onto my data warehouse connection, my data warehouse database. So I have brought in a new task. Let me go ahead and name it with the name from just create fact violation. by just giving it a single click, I should be able to rename that. Double click will let me edit it. Now we'll need a new connection. The connection will be very similar. Create a new connection. And new again. Again, SQL Server connection. Server name will be localhost again. Now I'll select a database, DW_inspection. So it's just like the last one, except the last one was hooked up to master. This one's going to be hooked up to our data warehouse. And we'll say OK. OK again, and that will now we'll see that this connection is going against the data warehouse. And now we're ready to put in the SQL statement that's going to create the fact table. Go ahead and paste that in and we'll take a look at it. I'll go look at it in Excel where I can show it a little bit better. Okay. So here what we're saying is that when we're creating this data warehouse, we want to start with a brand new clean copy of this fact table. So we're saying if the fact violation table is already there, then drop it. And then we're going to create the fact table. So we've created, probably wouldn't hurt for it to be there, doesn't need to be there. All right, so a few things about the violation, this fact table. Is there already a primary key in the operational system that's going to identify facts? Or identify violations? Yes, composite primary key, it's the inspection ID and the point ID. But we are going to create a new primary key that will be auto-generated here. So in our data warehouse, we're going to say, great, there's an identifier out there. We're not going to rely on that identifier. Those guys out there in the operational world, they're crazy. Who knows what they're going to send us? Let's make sure that we've got something that we can control for uniqueness. Yeah. It's a surrogate key. It's a surrogate key, right. And so that's what we're creating as the primary key. The information that I've decided we want in the fact table is the fine, how much money we charged for this violation, and the comment that the inspector made. And then we've got links, foreign keys, to all of our dimension tables. So we're going to create a table called dim inspection, one called dim point, dim license, dim employee. And I've just left the date with the original name because it really is just the inspection date. And we'll be using that to join to the date dimension. Questions here? All right. So now I'm going to give some sequencing. If I don't give sequencing to this, when I run this, SQL Server Integration Services is going to try to run it all at once. It really will try to run all these statements in parallel. But if I tell it, you know what, let's make sure we've created a database and then create the fact table, that'll be good. If we try to create the table before the database is in existence, we're going to be in trouble. And so that arrow says this one has to happen before this one. All right. So next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create these next two dimensions, the dim inspection and dim employee. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in fact, what I'll do is I'm going to now copy this SQL task here because it's already configured to have the right connection on it. And then I'll rename this one. Oops. I'll rename this one create dim inspection. And I'll put the code in for that one. I'll sequence it. And then create the next one as well. It's all copy and paste from here, folks. Okay, so the truth is that we could run all three of these statements in parallel. Once the database is created, I could go and create these all at the same time. But I know that it's going to take a little longer to create my date dimension because I'm not just creating it, I'm going to populate it as well. And so I'm going to say start this path and then start my date path as well, and we'll run those two in parallel. There's no reason to do them all at once because I know that one's going to take a long time. Questions? We're okay on the process of getting, you may not be there yet, but on the process of getting these different steps put in? Yep.
I'm just curious if you wanted to run like the same command on two different like databases, like you're pulling data to data warehouse from two servers.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way you could have it run like the same query on both of them?
Oh,
Do
so
you have to create another like connection?
yeah, there's the question. Do I have to create another statement here? Or could I somehow say I want this one to go against multiple?
Yeah.
And the answer is you have to create another task because each task gets only one connection.
Okay, you can't have it like iterate over.
As soon as you say you can't do something, I don't know. There may be a way to do that through code where I'm like changing the connection on this, but you wouldn't do that. It may be possible, but don't do that. Create another connection, another task that goes to that connection. Okay, so our next one then is going to be the date dimension. So we're doing the next task, create date dimension, and again, I'm going to copy an existing one. I will sequence this one again from the master after we've created the main database. And I'll put in the SQL for it. You have to be careful when you're copying these out of Excel because if there are carriage return characters in a cell in Excel and you just copy the cell, you get quotes around it. So, you see what I'm saying? If I copy this and paste it in the notepad where you can see it. This came, if I copied the cell directly, it came with those quotes. I've got to get rid of those quotes in the SQL statement. So either get rid of the quotes or copy it out of the formula bar, and that'll come without quotes. There's a question over here.
Back in Visual Studio there. So those don't have connections, is that right?
So these should have
Edit that.
these. Oh,
But there's no connection.
yeah, there should be a connection there. No, that's a mistake. So I do have to make sure that all these connections are going onto my data warehouse connection. That was the whole point in copying them, was to get the one that had the connection on it.
Because we've seen the double quotes at the beginning and end of the queries that come into Visual Studio or not.
Yeah, that's correct. So let me say that again. In fact, the problem, I think I hit cancel instead of OK on this first one. Let's take a look at that right now. So this is where I'm creating the fact table. I'm going to go ahead and get the SQL for creating the fact table. If you'll notice, if I look at it in Excel, the quote's not there. But anytime you copy a cell out of Excel that has a carriage return inside the cell, if there's a carriage return in it, when you paste that, Excel, or when you copy that, Excel actually puts quotes around it. There's probably a good reason for that. I have never wanted those quotes there. But they are. And so when I come and paste this in, it's got a quote at the beginning and a quote at the end that I've got to get rid of. But yeah, that's why there's an error on each of these. So yeah, I think my mistake was I hit cancel on the first one and then I copied it. So I've got to go and connect up this to my data warehouse connection. All right, now we're going to populate the date dimension. Let's see, populate date dimension. Let's just take a quick overview at this script that populates the date dimension. So, let's see if we can find it. That's not going to help. Let's try Notepad++. There we go. So the idea here is that we are going to run this script that just builds a bunch of days. It puts a bunch of days in and then specifies all the values in. We're keeping track of which day of the week it is, which day of the month it is, which day of the year it is, which holidays it pertains to. So here's where we're putting in the holidays. Good Friday is April 18th, and Good Friday. So if the month is 4 and the day of the month is 18, it seems like Good Friday should actually be on a Friday. The thing here actually says Friday about that. Month is 4, Easter Monday. Yeah, actually, I copied this script just off someone online. I thought, oh, here's a pretty good looking one, but I didn't really look at it that closely. Yeah, the fact that Good Friday is not on a Friday makes me think there's probably some problems here. So you don't want to look at this script as this is the date script. This is just a script that someone wrote that says, you know, I'm trying to set up a date dimension and trying to establish all these things. I knew there was a problem because this morning I looked at it and Thanksgiving wasn't even showing up. And he had it written Thanksgiving was going to be on the 4th. It was like on a Thursday when it happened to be the 4th day of the month. So instead of having Thursday of the 4th week, he had it Thursday on when it was the 4th day. Anyway, the point is, it may not be a very good script for a date dimension, but at least it creates a date dimension. And you can see there's a lot of work that goes into writing the script that creates this kind of dimension. Okay, should just be one more to go, and then we can go ahead and run this one. So I'm also saying when I create this database, I also want to create my staging database as well. And so that's my last step in this script. Create the staging database. Whoops. I lost the script for the populating the date dimension. Sequence that one. Thank you. And let's see. This one, since I'm creating a database, I don't really want to operate against my data warehouse database, so I'll copy the master. I'll copy the very first one that had the master database connection. Creating the staging database. I'll sequence it. And put the statement that just creates the staging database if it's not there. Whew. Once you've got that built, you should be able to execute it. And if we've got everything done right, it'll go through, run all those statements. And you'll see it's taking a little longer to run the script to populate the data dimension. Yes?
So, could you have created your staging database simultaneously as your DW?
Oh, yeah. So here's the question. Is there anything, the real question is if I look at this one, I absolutely have to create this database before I create this fact table because it's going into that database. And so I had to sequence this one. So did I really need to sequence this one, or could it happen in parallel with this one? The answer is it could have happened in parallel. So this arrow doesn't really need to be there. But again, because I know I'm waiting so long for this one, then I could have even put this at the end of this chain over here, and it still would have been done before I got here. Okay, that's the process. How are we doing so far? It's really the process of using this tool. We haven't done any ETL yet. All we've done is, created some tables, and we've put a little data in, but it's really not extracted from anywhere. So the next process then is to actually do some extracting, transforming, and loading. And so for that, I'm going to create a new package. So the whole idea here is to say, listen, we've got to have something in place. We've got to have, we got some script that's going to build the data warehouse. We don't want to run this every time. We don't want to blow the data warehouse away every time we create it. So this is one that we would run to get it in place. Then we'll have another one that we'll set up that we would run periodically to be able to bring new data in. And so that's what we're building now. So I am going to add a new package, if I can remember how to do it. Right click, there we go. I'm going to come over here to, in my Solution Explorer, I'm going to right click my SSIS packages and click New SSIS package. Yeah, go ahead. Which one's the error? No, which? Oh, it doesn't even say which one error. It's got an error. So not letting you run at all. So. So you just have this created. Okay, anyone else? All right, new package then. Package 1, I guess, is a fine name for it. And we're going to be building out what we have on the ETL tab over here in Excel. we actually have 3 ETL blocks here. We're not going to get to all of them in the next 15 minutes. But as long as we get through 1 or 2 of these, we'll get the feeling. So this is, if we kind of look right here, I'm doing 3 things. I am going to create a table that's going to be there to hold the data that I'm pulling in from the operational system. So what I don't want to do is I want to put as little possible on the operational system as the transaction system as possible. So all I want to do is extract the data, and then I don't want to hit it again after that. And so the first step here is we're going to create a table that's going to hold the data that I'm staging. I'm going to pull it out in exactly the same format that it is in the operational system. And then that creates the table, and then this is the one that's actually going to pull the data, and then I'm going to push it to the data warehouse. There will be a transformation here. So let's take a look. So this first one is a script. I've called it create staging employee. I will bring in an SQL task. I will name it, and we'll configure it. Now, this one is going to be going into our staging database. We created the staging database when we ran our last package. And so we'll need to connect up to that database now, so a different connection. We'll make a new connection. Again, it'll be localhost. Localhost. Looks funny in all caps. The database now is going to be called staging. And again, that database was created in the last script that we ran. I've got a statement to execute here as well. And this statement really is just exactly the same create table statement that was used to create the operational employee table. It's just a copy of the table so that we have somewhere to push the data without doing any modification to it. Okay. We'll say okay. That one is just like the ones we've done before, but now we've got to actually transfer data. If I'm moving data if I'm moving data on one server, from someplace on this server to another place on this server, I can use this same script. It's just a script. I can write a SQL statement that will do that. But if I am moving data from one server to a different server, the SQL script isn't going to do it for me. I'm going to need another tool for that. And for that, I need the data flow task. And so I will drag in a data flow task. And I will name this one as I've named it here, called stage employee. Let's see. I might have got the wrong one. Yeah, that's a SQL test. Thank you. That's why it looks a little bit weird. But data flow task. Stage employee. Now, if I double click this, there we go. That takes me to another pane. This is the data flow pane. And now I've got different tools over here. And so I'm going to need to bring in both a source and a destination for this data flow. So again, I'm on my control flow here. I double click stage employee, and that took me to my data flow pane here. I'll start by bringing on a source assistant. This is going to say, great, what do you want to connect to? Now it happens that the data that we're going to pull is also sitting in a SQL server. It's a different SQL server. It's a SQL server that's running at my house. About to connect onto my house. So SQL Server, but it's not my local staging one, so I will click New. Maybe I'll double-click New. And so for the server name, it's going to be data.websql.org. It has no idea, that server has no idea who you are, and so Windows authentication is not going to work here. So we will change this to SQL Server authentication. And here you will need your credentials from my educator. So I'm going to come over here to my educator, and you should have a menu here that says My Database Credentials. And actually, if I show this, you will see my database credentials. And actually, you'll see all yours because all my students' credentials are listed here as well. Name and your password that's there.
Are you recording this as well?
The difference between recording it and publishing it, you know. I may have to actually learn how to edit something before I publish it. So I'm user 1 group 0, U1G0, and then my password. I will save my password there. Now, the database where all your stuff in my educator is stored is called user data. So again, we're making another connection, but this one we're connecting on to an offsite database server. And there are lots of different sources. That only shows the ones that are installed on your machine, but you can get drivers for other sources. You can hook up to Oracle, whatever you want. I will test the connection. Test succeeded, that's always nice. Okay, so here it created this connection, web, sql.org, user data, and then me. And that's the source, so I'm going to call this the source, I'm just going to call it employee. So this block is now hooked up to that source data. Did I tell it the table? I haven't told it a table yet. Ah, there we go. So yeah, I came back too far. So I'm going to come back and edit this again. That's the source now that I have. And now I'm going to select, there's a group called inspection, and I'm looking for inspection.employee. So it takes two things here. I've got to specify the connection I'm using, then the table that I want. And I can actually come to this list of columns, and I should be able to say which columns I actually want to work with. I was kind of hoping that would go, yeah. So and so I can uncheck any of these columns that I don't want to bring in. So here I'm saying, we'll bring these in. While we're at it, I think I'm going to add something different that's not on the script in the Excel. Anyway, I want all these to be here because I'm just taking a copy from the operational system and putting it in my staging database. Yes?
It's taking a little while to load the list of tables.
Yes, it will take a little while to load the list of tables because there are 80,000 user accounts on that server. And so it's actually looking across all of them to see what tables you have access to. But it shouldn't take more than, well, there's a bunch of you doing it at the same time.
Yeah.
So I'll do a little tap dance while we wait. But hopefully it won't take much longer. Anyone actually gotten that list to show up? So some of you have. So hopefully it won't take. You re-clicked it and it came up?
Yeah, so I was in it, it wasn't loading, so I exited out. Well, just out of that window.
So you were here. This wasn't showing.
Cancel. And then I
Clicked it again. Loading. Okay. Some of you are coming through now. Employee. EMP. Okay.
Which one?
Inspection.employee should be the one. All right, let me go ahead then and also bring in a destination. So I'll come to my destination assistant and drag it in. This one I'm going to come to my local host staging. So that connection's already there. And let me go ahead and I'll connect these two together before I double click it. So these two arrows says, listen, if we can bring in the, we're going to try to push the data along this arrow. We're going to try to take from employee and put it whatever this destination is. If it fails, we can send the failed records to some different location with the red arrow. So that's why we have two here. We are going to work just with the one today. I'm going to call this staging employee. I'll double click it. And now we're here, localhost staging, that's my connection. Which table do we want to use? I need the staging table. What the problem is, I haven't run the step that creates that table yet. So I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to come back to my control flow. And this task here is creating the table that I need for this next one. So I'm going to run this one now so I can get the next one configured. I've executed that. It creates. I'll click stop. Come back to my data flow. Staging employee. That should now have the employee table here. So I've got my source connection set up. It's hooked up to my destination. It now knows which table it's coming from, what table it's going to. It happens here that all the column names are exactly the same. I'm just copying the data from one into the other. That may not be the case. And when it's not the case, I'll need to come into mappings and tell it which column goes to which column. So this allows me to say, I've got some set of fields here, some set of fields here. Which way do they go? And in this case, it's a straight mapping straight across. All right. I can test this one if I want to, just by clicking run. And it should. Yep. Looks like everything went okay. I'm now just going to pop over to SQL Server Management Studio, do a new query. Use staging. So I'm on my local SQL Server. Select star from employee in my staging database. And here I have the records then. We can see that it actually pulled the data from the server into this other staging area. Yeah?
Every time you run this, is it appending to this table or is it replacing?
So the question is, every time I run this, is it going to append to that? And the whole, what I'm after here is just to bring in a copy of the current employee table. And so because I'm going to be sequencing this, create staging employee blows away that table, recreates it. And so it's not going to append on. When we get to where we're moving it from the staging, when we get to this, where we're moving it from the staging to push it to the data warehouse, we're going to want to append instead of just copy. So we've gotten this part done, we've gotten this part done. We don't have time to do this, but I do want to show you one other thing. I want to show you at least the transform. Okay, so
I'm here on my data flow task. I'm connecting onto my source data. Here's my destination data. So I've got an extract and I've got a load, but what I want to do is a transform in the middle. And so when I'm here on a data flow task, I should have a other transformations group. Here we go. And I'm looking for a character map. There it is. I'll drag this character map in and delete that arrow, and I will push employee to the character map. And then from the character map, we'll come back to the staging employee. So now we're saying, listen, as the data is coming off of the operational database, on its way into the staging database, we are going to take and do a character map on it. So I'll name this character map uppercase upper employees. And we'll double click it to modify it. So now here are all the columns that are coming into this transformation process. I just want to I'll check first name and last name, and I'm going to change these. The destination, instead of being a new column, I'll do a transformation in place. And the operation is going to be make it uppercase. I'll do the same thing for the last name. Uppercase. All right, so now it's going to say, hey, these two, I'm modifying them. Whatever they come in as, we're going to make them uppercase on the way through. So that's a simple transformation, an extract, transform, and load. So now if I execute this, let's see, go ahead and execute that. And we'll come over, so it worked okay. We'll come back to SQL Server so we can see it's lowercase here. Go ahead and execute this query again. And now we can see those names are in uppercase. So we've successfully done that transformation. Okay, so I'll exit out of debug and come back to my control flow. So now this stage employee does the extract, the transform, and load into our staging database. And I would like to do the one more thing. I would like to push this all the way through to our data warehouse. So I'm going to bring in, so my data warehouse is on the same SQL Server as my staging database. And so I'm going to go ahead and use a execute SQL task to make that move. So this one I'll go ahead and pull back off of the Excel sheet. Should my third one down. Create staging employee, stage inspection. Here we go. Publish to data warehouse. That's what I'll call this one. I'll connect it up after stage employee. And this is going to be going to our data warehouse. We'll need to establish that connection. So connection. I don't have one set up for my data warehouse yet, so it'll be a new connection. Here it is, DW inspection, that's the one. Now I will put in, that was interesting, let's try that again. There we go. Now I will put in the SQL statement, which I will again pull from our Excel sheet. Let's see. So we've got create, save, here we go, push employee to data warehouse. Actually, before I paste this one in, let's go ahead and take a look at this statement. I guess we can look at it right here. So I'm going to be inserting into my employee dimension. I'm specifying all of these columns. I'm not specifying the primary key. The primary key on that one is a surrogate key. It'll auto increment itself. So I've got to specify all of the fields that I'm putting in, and then I'm going to select that same set of fields from my staging, my staged employee table. But I'm not taking all of the records. I'm taking that specific set of columns, but I'm only going to take the records where the employee ID, that's the business identifier, is not in the set of employee IDs that are already in the data warehouse. So this first time through, there are no employees in the data warehouse, and so it'll bring them all in. But on subsequent runnings of this, it'll only add in new employees that have been added since the last time we imported the data. So I will bring this in as the SQL statement here. Okay, so now I've got this process here that creates a table for staging my employee data, brings the employee data out by hooking on to my transactional system, does a transformation on the way, then it's staged, and then that's all the transformation that we're going to do on the employee, and then we'll push it over here to the data warehouse. So I should be able to run this whole thing. There we go. Oh, we got an error here. Let's take a look at that error. Oops, the error is showing down here. Task failed. Error. Invalid object name employee. Possible failure reason problems with the query. Let's take a look at that. So I'll go out of debug mode, take a closer look at this, and let's see what we've got here. Okay. So my connection, here's the problem, is that my connection is, I'm connected up to the data warehouse inspection, and that needs to be on the staging database. Because when I just say, here I'm specifying that connection in the query, but I'm assuming that we're connected onto the staging database. So let me make that change. Push this back to staging. And then this query then should be set up correctly. So we'll go ahead and run that again and see if it goes through without error. There we go. So the query was just written assuming that the connection would be the staging connection, and I'd specified the other database for the data warehouse. So now we should be able to come back to SQL Server Management Studio and use DW inspection. Select star from dim employee, and that should now show that we've got that into our data warehouse. So primary key here is auto counting. We have the employee ID that came from the operational system plus the other data, and so we've got one of our dimension tables built here in the data warehouse.